Lesson 29, the President and the Vice President. We are picking up with the Electoral College map of 2008 to show President Obama's electoral victory. 370 votes for Obama, 164 for John McCain. This was 2008. 2012, President Obama is running for re-election against Mitt Romney, the former governor of Massachusetts, who was the Republican nominee. Obama was the Democrat nominee. Again, blue, Democrat, red, Republican. And when you compare the two maps from 2008 to 2012, you can see that several states had swung over to the Republican side. For example, Arizona voted for Romney in 2012. And if you take a look at, I believe, let's see, what else did North Carolina? Yes. How could I miss North Carolina went for Romney in 2012? So those were two states that Romney won in 2012 that Obama had won in 2008. But it still was a pretty big victory for President Obama, 332 electoral votes in 2012. Romney had 206. Again, remember, 270 is needed to win. 270 is needed to win. The 2016 election was a very controversial election with a very contentious campaign. The results were for President Trump, 306 electoral votes versus Clinton's 232. Now, if you compare the results from 2012 to 2016, it's quite interesting. You can see that many of these northern, Midwestern industrial states that Obama had won in 2012, which had historically gone for Democrats in the last election cycles, Donald J. Trump was able to win those states. We're talking about Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa. All those states had gone for Obama in 2012. But Trump was able to flip those states in 2016. And as a result, he also was able to take Florida. Interestingly enough, the margin by which he won those states, if you add up those Midwestern states, those four big ones, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, he won those states by less than 80,000 total votes. 80,000. But he was able, even though he won those four states by less than 80,000 total votes, he was to take a lot of electoral votes. Pennsylvania with 20, Ohio with 18, that's 38. Then you add 16 from Michigan, 54. Add 10 from Wisconsin, that's 64. So President Trump now won those four big states by less than 80,000 votes, popular votes, but took 64 big electoral votes. And then when you add in Florida, with the 29 electoral votes, President Trump was able to win 306 total votes. We know that Secretary Clinton received more popular votes than Donald J. Trump, close to 3 million more popular votes, mostly on the basis of Secretary Clinton's strength in the West, particularly in California, which is a very populous state. But the popular vote does not select our president. The president is chosen through electoral vote. Electoral vote. And a reminder, each state's electoral vote is equal to the number of congressional representatives that that state has, both House members and senators combined. Okay, back to the term of office for the president. A president serves a 4-year term, 1 4-year term before running for re-election. The 22nd Amendment limits the president to 2 full 4-year terms, or a maximum of 10 years if the president took office during another president's term. Example of that was President Truman, who was the vice president of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There was no 22nd Amendment when Roosevelt ran for a 4th term. Remember, it was George Washington who set the precedent for later presidents to serve only 2 terms and then step down. And every president from Washington through Franklin Delano Roosevelt had done that, or up until Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was Roosevelt who broke that trend. He ran for a 3rd term in 1940. He won, and then ran for a 4th term in 1944 and won. However, he died in his first year of his 4th term. His vice president, Harry Truman, took over and served out the remaining 3 years. Truman ran for himself in 1948, and he won election in 1948. However, that brought his total to 7 years in office, 7 years. He could not run in 1952 for another term, because that would have made it 11 total years. Even though he only served 1 full term, had he been elected in 1952, that would have been 11 total years. And the 20th Amendment was passed in 1950 that limited a president's term to 2 elected terms, 8 years, or a maximum of 10 years, if the president took office during another president's term. Benefits of being president: a $400,000 annual salary, you get to live and work in the White House, lots of personal staff. You have access to a retreat in Maryland called Camp David, and you get to travel around the country in Air Force One, ride around in motorcades. President Trump and every president has a $50,000 expense account available, a $100,000 non-taxable travel account, and a $19,000 entertainment account, in addition to the $400,000 yearly salary. Retired presidents receive a pension. It's a pretty nice pension. And that pension is based on the salary of the current administration's cabinet secretaries, which is currently $199,700 a year. So President Obama now is receiving almost $200,000 each year as part of his retirement plan, his pension for ex-presidents. Plus, retired presidents receive Secret Service protection for 10 years after they leave office. 10 years. So President Obama receives Secret Service protection. He'll receive that for another 9 years or so. You have a White House domestic staff of more than 80 serving the president and his family. Mentioned the motorcades, a special fleet of cars, helicopters, and traveling in motorcades. That's the presidential limousine. When the president travels in a motorcade, they actually shut down the roadway or the highway while the president is traveling from one point to another. So there's only traveling on that road for the presidential cars in a motorcade. This is the residence of the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. This is the north facade. And this is the south view of the White House, the south lawn. presidential helicopter landing on the South Lawn. A view of the White House from the Washington Monument, again from the South Lawn. You can see connected to the White House to the left is what we call the West Wing of the White House. That's where the president works and his top staffers work in that connection to the White House. And then you have the East Wing, which is the right side of this picture. Outside the Cabinet Room, alongside what we call the Rose Garden of the White House. Sometimes presidents have press conferences in the Rose Garden. The working part of the White House complex is the West Wing. And the president's office in the West Wing is on the first floor, and it's round or oval in shape and called the Oval Office. When a new president comes in, he will probably change the upholstery on the furniture, change out the carpet. The desk is the very same desk that George Washington used in the White House. President Trump at the presidential desk in the Oval Office. President Obama and then Secretary of State Clinton in the Oval Office. President Bush addressing reporters inside the Oval Office. President Kennedy meeting with civil rights leaders in the Oval Office. The Red Room of the White House is used for small receptions and teas, and it's called the Red Room because of the red wallpaper and the red upholstery on the furniture. The Blue Room. The president often meets guests in the Blue Room. Again, blue upholstery and blue curtains. The China Room. With lots of china, as you can see in the picture. The Vermeil Room is pronounced Vermeil. It's a type of metal. It's silver. Vermeil is 90% silver, but also plated in gold. So this is the Vermeil Room. The State Dining Room. This is all inside the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The president may host receptions or dinners for heads of state, ambassadors from other countries in the State Dining Room. The Diplomatic Reception Room. The hallway from the State Dining Room to the East Room displays portraits of recent presidents. And then Camp David is a retreat in Maryland, north of Washington, where the president can go on weekends. Camp David. Sometimes presidents invite foreign leaders to Camp David to get away from Washington, to meet with them on maybe a more personal, less formal meetings. This is Ronald Reagan with President Reagan with then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher from Great Britain. Camp David, President Bush and Russian President Putin, they met at Camp David. Again, this is north of Washington. It's a retreat. We're in Maryland. President Bush with President Putin. President Obama working in his office from Camp David. The first family of President Obama at Camp David. President Obama with German Chancellor Angela Merkel working in Camp David, again outside of Washington. We'll pause here again for this lesson and pick up with lesson number 31.